So Ariel, great to meet you earlier this week at Helium House, and thanks a lot for sitting down for a conversation with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So looking forward to getting into the project a little bit. So I guess a logical place to start is if you could very briefly introduce Hivemapper.
Sure. Hivemapper is a very simple concept. So we're building this decentralized global map. So think something along the lines of Google Maps ultimately. And so all you do is you buy this dash cam. So you go to the Hivemapper website. It's a dash cam that looks and smells like every dash cam in the world. You install the dash cam, takes about 30 minutes to install the dash cam. All of the imagery and location data that this dash cam is collecting ultimately makes its way up automatically to Hivemapper. We take all that imagery location data and then transform it into map data, do quality assurance on and all that. And then that data is then sold to customers, right? So these are business customers who, somebody like a FedEx or an Uber or a Yelp or somebody like that, who's taking this imagery, taking this data, this map data, and building it into their own products, right? And using this data to run their products more efficiently, more effectively, and so forth. And so the cool part about it is rather than, say, hey, we're just gonna take this data for free, right? What we're actually doing is rewarding those people who are contributing with something called the Honey token. That's Hivemapper's cryptocurrency. And what that effectively does is that confers ownership in this decentralized global map that we're all building together. So that's the basic idea.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned this token incentive model, right? So we've seen it with Helium. They've been incredibly successful getting almost 1 million of their hotspots out using this model. Is that for you the main reason why you would build a project like Hivemapper on the blockchain to facilitate the tokens, or are there other reasons why you would build this on the blockchain?
Yeah, so if you take a step back and just look at how maps historically have been built, there's a couple of different approaches, right? You have what I refer to as the Google approach, right? So you have a lot of money, you're looking for ways to actually use that money and build new products and services. So Google spared no expense, right? So every single Google Street View card that you see costs anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million. They have their own airplanes, sensors, yada, yada. So they own and operate and pay the drivers, pay the pilots, all of that, right? But all the value ultimately accrues back into Google, right? Into the Google shareholders and Google employees and so forth. And they also, by the way, take a lot of our data, right? You have an Android app, you have a Google Maps app, they're siphoning off a lot of our data as well. So that's one approach. The other approach is, crowdsource, pure crowdsource, right? So in the mapping world, what that really meant was they would go after GIS geeks and mapping geeks. I'm one of those, right? I come from that world. And so the basic idea there is, okay, help us build this map, we're all working together. That does work, it just takes an incredible amount of time, right? And also, in the case of Waze, that's a good example of a purely crowdsource. I don't think they actually, Google was acquired Waze for $1.2 billion, right? The employees made a lot of money, as they should. The investors made a lot of money. But without all the data that was collected and annotated and edited by a lot of people who put a lot of time and effort into that, there is no Waze, right? And I fundamentally think that's wrong. And so that's one of the big things that we're looking to solve here. Is saying, if we're going to build this map together, data collection, data editing, and QA is a big part of that. And if you're going to help do that in the Hivemapper project, then you're going to participate in the rewards associated with it.
Yeah, so I guess the token side of things, it really puts, let's say, an incentive for everybody participating in the project to make the project as good as possible. You've seen, with Helium, obviously the HIPs, the improvement proposals, and from a governance perspective, it also gives everyone an opportunity to participate. So will Hivemapper also have HIPs, because I guess it's H as well, or have you got that far?
Yeah, we will have some form of that. We'll probably keep HIP, for Helium. We don't want to confuse
MIP
folks.
Maybe, map improvement proposals.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that, actually. So yes, we will have that. We absolutely, want and need to have that. And you already have a lot of people in the mapping community who are generally familiar with these kinds of concepts, right? Of, hey, we should build a data model like this, or we should change the reward mechanism like this. So I'm excited to go do that. So once the foundation gets fully formalized and set up, they will be the ones running that process.
Okay, no, it makes sense. I think as well, if you're taking a long-term view, one of the most important factors is obviously sustainability. So you talked a little bit a minute ago about some of the use cases of Hivemapper, but perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on precisely who will be using the data that's gathered. I guess who the end customer is, who's going to be paying for this.
Yeah. So look, the mapping world is a big, big market, right? So that's the good news, right? So you're looking at automotive, you're looking at logistics companies, transportation companies, but even beyond that, you're looking at real estate, residential real estate, commercial real estate, government at the both federal level and the local level, right? You're looking at other kind of new social media type of things, whether it be like a Yelp or a Snapchat, right? One of the most used features within Snapchat right now is Snap Maps, right? Okay. So like where can you see people, your friends and buddies and all that kind of stuff. And I was actually watching a kid do this and he's like, this is where I spend all my time. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's not the way that I spend my time on social media.
In the early phases, obviously users will be rewarded with the Honey token. Could you elaborate on how the short-term versus long-term rewards will work for users and for participants, and how the revenue generation side ties into that?
Sure. So yeah, you're right. In the early days, it's very much about the token, right? Because you're building supply. Supply is the product in the context of Hivemapper, right? Without people collecting data, processing data, editing, there's no product to sell, and so there's no revenue to be had. So that's why the token is so important, especially in the early days. But at a certain point, as the supply gets there, as the map becomes more mature, coverage, freshness start to get scale right across many, many, many regions across the world, then revenue will become a big part of how these contributors are ultimately rewarded. And so the way, I don't want to go too into detail because there's a lot of detail here, but the basic concept is, look, revenue comes in, so fiat comes in. So let's say somebody like a FedEx says, okay, here's $500,000, right, per year that I'm paying you for these mapping APIs. Underneath the hood, what's actually happening? Underneath the hood, that actually buys a certain number of map credits, right? When those APIs are actually used on a day-to-day basis, those map credits burn a set number of tokens, right? So basically remove those tokens, and then that gives the protocol the ability to mint a new set of tokens that are then rewarded to those contributors for which the FedEx used the data, right? So let's say FedEx was interested in data in Los Angeles and London and Manila, right? Those contributors that helped build those locations would be rewarded because that's where FedEx is actually using the data. And the thing is that people, look, Hivemapper Inc., right, as the launchers of this mapping network, this project, we're going to be building these mapping APIs, right? But the mapping market is massive, right? And there's a lot of little niches or bigger niches, right? I'll give you one example, trucking, right? Trucking navigation and logistics is a whole separate part of navigation, basically turn-by-turn directions, than you and I use to just get around, go to the grocery store, go to a soccer game or football game. Yeah. And there's a couple of companies that serve that market. Each of those companies does over $150 million a year in revenue, right? Because the niche, the specific pieces of data that are really, really critical for a trucking company are different than what you and I use, right? And so there will be other organizations and businesses as the map grows that then tap in and build their own products and services on top of the mapping network. Some of those may compete with Hivemapper Inc., and we're fine with, right? As long as there's a lot of different organizations and businesses building on top of the mapping network, value accrues to the mapping network.
Okay, and then at the micro level, it's actually the developers for these logistics firms like FedEx or other companies who are going to be using the API from Hivemapper, and that's how the data is going to be used. So is the ultimate plan to build something that's rivaling better than Google Maps? Why would those developers use Hivemapper's data rather than, say, Google?
Yeah, two factors, freshness and cost. So let's start with freshness. Given our cost structure is much, much, much lower than something like Google Maps, we can be refreshing the map much more frequently, right? So let's just take, this dash cam, a main street running down San Francisco, which is Google's backyard. Google Street View maybe sees that once every 14 months. For that same cost, this dash cam can see it basically every week. Yeah. So it's a big cost structure advantage that we have, and so we can see locations. So if you're FedEx, and you're relying on Google Maps and Google Maps data, that data that you're looking at may be 9, 12, 18 months out of the day. Like, you can't tell Google, like, go fix it, So that's one. The other thing is, look, Google and Google Maps have just consistently raised their prices. They kind of can because they're just massive and they effectively yes, they have no competition. Thank you for saying that. And so that makes it a lot easier for them. And so I think by, if we have similar levels of quality and we're fresher, right, and we're much more cost effective, that's why somebody is. I'll say one last thing on this, which is these customers, like, it's not like if you go shopping for CRM software, right, or marketing analytics software, you have, literally hundreds of viable vendors. In the mapping world, that's not true, right? And so these customers that we talk to oftentimes, they are so hungry for alternatives, right? And so they are very, very keen to see somebody else that's legitimate, that is at scale, that is cost effective, enter the market.
Okay, and you're getting towards the, if I'm not mistaken, the end of the kind of beta phase of mapping during the first phase. Do you have demand for those images that you've created or the data you've created from that stage?
Yeah, so we ran an alpha stage with 9 different regions, and we're now in the testnet phase for the mapping network, which will launch into beta Q4. So we're coming up on it really, really shortly. And so so we have customers who basically said is like, give us everything that you have in these 9 regions. Actually, let me be specific about it. 7 out of the 9 regions is what they wanted. And so, yes, and then obviously as we expand over here, into this beta phase, yes, absolutely. Like, we have folks who are like signing up for, just give me everything you have in these regions that we're interested in.
Okay. Yeah, and it's great to hear sort of your vision for the revenue generation side of things. Is there anything else that you have in mind for Hivemapper for creating more revenue?
Yeah, there's other use cases that I think in terms of the consumer, right? If you look at products in the, let's say, search space, right, that are very, very privacy centric, something like DuckDuckGo, right? I mean, DuckDuckGo is actually like a meaningful business at this point, all centered around the idea of a private search experience. And so I do think there are people who are very, very conscientious about location privacy, and some of those would actually be willing to pay for a mapping application that protects their privacy from a location perspective. So obviously you can get a Google Maps is free, Apple Maps also is free, Apple's good in specific parts in the US. And so I do think there's this hunger as more and more people start to realize that their location privacy is being compromised on a daily basis. If you can build a product or services, like let's say it's $3 a month or $5 a month, so it's not a crazy amount of money, but you can definitely see like 100 million, a couple 100 million people paying for that on a monthly basis. And so I do think that's interesting. That's much further down the road, but that's something that we take seriously in terms of privacy, in terms of how we collect and process this data. And I think extending that down to the consumer is also potentially interesting down the road.
Yeah, and just to very briefly touch on that, you're doing things like blurring out people's faces, blurring out the license plates of cars, those kind of things to protect privacy.
Exactly, yeah. And even when you sign up for Hivemapper to be a contributor, we don't collect any private information. No email addresses, no phone numbers, nothing like that. So we actually give you a username because we don't want you to create your own username and potentially reveal who you are. So we take privacy super seriously, and we think that we can ultimately potentially one day extend that to the consumer experience.
Okay, so Ariel, I guess the most important thing is going to be building a quality product to rival Google Maps. What do you think the most important factor for getting there is? And do you have any targets for the amount of dash cams that you want to put out by, let's say, I don't know, the second half of next year or the end of next year?
So, getting as good or better than Google Maps, on a global level, the dash cam is the first sensor, right? That's the one that we're selling today. We will also next year look to do a 360 camera. That's a camera that goes on top of your roof, as well as kind of this concept called the puck, what we refer to as a traffic puck. And so you put a puck in your car, it's a little tiny little device. Hopefully we can get the cost down there really, really low, and that'll provide us with traffic. So in that situation, then you have, the 360 camera, right, which is an amazing consumer experience, right? This in terms of fast image refresh, right? and then the traffic, which is real time effectively, right? So that combination of those three different parts of the map on a global level will create something that's freaking awesome, right? Okay, so let's talk about how many devices we need there ultimately. We'll probably need 500,000 of Dashcam devices.
Is that going to be the main device?
Yeah, this will be the main device, right? Because it's imagery, there's other data. It will be the workhorse of the map for sure. And so you probably need 500,000 of these, 10 to 15,000 of the 360 cameras that go on top of the roofs, and then about 1 million or so of the plaques, right? Yeah. So if you got that distributed properly all over the world, then you got something that you can start to really compete and put a lot of pressure on Google.
Okay, and do you have a timeline for getting there?
No, the timeline. Yeah, I think it's a couple years. I think we'll have something by the end of next year that is just in 100, 200 regions across the world, which is just amazing, right, from a Dashcam perspective. But 360 cameras and that traffic stuff, that'll take a little bit longer to come on. So, but look, even with this provides a tremendous amount of value, right? You can start to monetize from a customer perspective even after, even before you have the full suite of sensors.
Awesome. I think it's a hugely exciting idea. I know that I'm personally very excited to get my dash cams and get mapping. I guess in closing, is there anything that you'd say to people who might be sitting on the fence? Why should they buy the dash cam?
Well, why should buy the Dashcam? I think, look, beyond all the rewards and the tokens and the sense of ownership, which I think is a really important one, a map should be owned by the people who live on this earth, right? In my view, a map should not be owned by a massive corporation. We are the ones who move around this earth, right? It's our earth. There's really nobody else. And so who else better to own it than us, right? Who else better to build it than us? And so if you're excited by that idea of that project, then you should definitely come on board and get on board in the early days when it's a lot more, it's fun, when you can form it, when you can influence it, right? When you can push it in the directions that you think it needs to be pushed in. And so we love to, engage with the community who kind of feel that way and want to help build us something new with us.
Awesome, and yeah, hugely excited to follow your progress and I guess be with you along the journey. And thanks so much for taking some time to speak to us today.
Thank you, man. This has been fun.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.